Hello and welcome to the Business of Winning podcast, brought to you by Performance Insights, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide. Just click on www.performanceinsights.co.uk and send us your requirements.
Well, it really is a great pleasure to have you, Marc Priestley, on the Business of Winning podcast. Great to have this opportunity, particularly to chat to you in light of your new book, Pit Lane Life Lessons. So first of all, how are you and how has 2025 been for you? One busy man.
Yes, thank you for having me. Really great to chat again, Mark. Yeah, it's been a busy year, but, all in a good way. So I think we'd be moaning if it wasn't busy in our business, but things have been really intense, a lot of travel, a lot of running around, as you say, getting a book finished and then published and now on the shelves. So all really exciting stuff. And it's nice when you've done all the hard work, which is the sort of building these things, the filming the TV show that I do, the writing the book, and then finally you get to share it with people. The TV show is now on screens for people on Discovery Channel, and the book Pit Lane Lessons is now out on the shelves. So it's a great period for me where I'm sort of hopefully able to get the feedback. This is what we do in this business, isn't it? Where we produce this content, we get immediate feedback when people get to see it. And so far, things are going very well.
I'm sure we'll talk about feedback and how we use that in Formula One as we go through this conversation. Now, for the benefit of listeners who maybe have, they've heard you on BBC 5 Live, or they've maybe come across content online, etc. Just for the benefit of listeners, talk to us a little bit about your journey since being a world championship winning mechanic at McLaren. And really the last 20 years have been extraordinary for you, haven't they, Mark?
Yeah, really have. Unpredictable. I could have never really foreseen the journey that I have been on. The dream when I was a kid was to get into Formula One, which I was lucky enough to do, and then had this amazing journey through it, like you say, winning the World Championship with Lewis. But since then, I've been on a completely different journey, but all linked to what I did in Formula One. So today I co-host a huge car show on Discovery Channel, Wheeler Dealers, which goes to an extraordinary number of people around the world. That's mind-blowing in itself, and it's a completely different direction to the one that I was in. Writing books, as you say, this is my second book that's just come out, and commentating on the sport that I love. This Formula One has been my life. So, as I said, everything I do today is in some way linked to my journey through F1. And, just like you, Mark, as you well know, I do a lot of public speaking and a lot of working with businesses to help them to benefit from some of the things that I have learned through my time in this sport, working with an elite level team. It's a real privilege to work at the front line of a Formula One organization, as you know, and to be able to share some of those learnings with, first of all, businesses, and now through the book, particularly everybody, is a really nice way to hopefully give a little bit of that back. Now,
I think when all of us step out of our Formula One team environment into the big wide world outside of the paddock, it can be a little bit daunting. You're a really busy guy. Do you find that the combination of everything you now do replaces some of that adrenaline charged excitement that we had working in the pit lane?
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually, because when you do leave, I think like a top athlete in any sport, if you're particularly sort of front and center of something, I think to step away from that, you lose the attention on you, you lose the adrenaline rush that comes with it, particularly being part of a pit stop. For me, which was part of the whole 10 years that I was at McLaren, I was part of pit stops. That's the biggest adrenaline rush in the world. It's the most amazing thing. And that was probably the hardest thing to replace. You miss everything. You miss the traveling with the team, being part of that team environment and sort of celebrating when you win, commiserating together even when you lose. That's a real bond that you form between those people. So you miss that to some extent. But the adrenaline rush of a pit stop was something that was really difficult. And the only thing that's come close to replacing that, and actually it's been brilliant, is live broadcasting. So I went from the Formula One team, into broadcasting live with Formula One. So first of all with the BBC and then with Sky. And that moment when someone says action, or someone says, count you down to going live, it's not quite the same as a pit stop, but it's a real buzz. It's a real adrenaline rush. So I guess to some extent I've replaced the pit stops with the broadcasting to lots of people, and having to still delivering under pressure. Particularly when you're live, you get one shot at getting that right, and it's the same kind of thing. So all the things I learned through Formula One to cope with pit stops and deal with that kind of side of things has obviously helped me now in the next part of my career.
Now, I didn't have a technical role, as you know. I worked on the commercial side of Formula One, but I used to bring guests into the garage to see a pit stop, and sometimes we'd get to stand right at the front of the garage, so maybe like 2 meters away from the pit crew, and it used to amaze me to see it in the flesh, at such close hand. And actually, I always used to say, guests would reach for their phone, and by the time they got the phone out, the pit stop was gone. I mean, it's just incredible. And I think TV, as it does with so much sport, kind of compresses everything. You don't really get to see the visceral nature of what happens. But for you as a pit stop member, it's just the most extraordinarily frenetic, and yet it has to also be robotic, doesn't it? It's just a process that you guys just seamlessly deliver with great repeatability.
Yeah, but as you know, that doesn't come by chance. That comes. I always say to people that a pit stop, that 2 seconds of a pit stop is really like the tip of a very large iceberg. And actually, that pit stop was months and months in the making. Because it's all the thousands of practice stops. It's the sort of training, physical training, the mental preparation. And teams today take that incredibly seriously. As far as going to the lengths of managing nutrition of the people involved, and the psychological pressures that we feel when you go into that zone of a high pressure pit stop. And if you think about the races that we're in, the stage of the season we're currently in Formula One, we're coming towards the end of it. There's a championship on the line. My team, McLaren, really in the heart of and the thick of that championship. I always think about the guys in the pit stops, because it feels like the pit stops now towards the end become even greater, even higher pressure, because it feels like there's more relying or, sitting upon them. The truth is they're not. And this is one of the things we learned. The pit stop they did in the first race in Australia was no more or less important than the one they'll do in Abu Dhabi, but it just feels that way. And so you have to go to those kind of lengths to manage that level of expectation and that psychological impact that it can have, because the process of going through a pit stop, like you say, takes a couple of seconds. We're so well drilled in it. It's muscle memory almost. The thing that will trip you up is the mental side of that, and what you feel like is riding on it. So we put a lot goes into now from a team side of things. A lot goes into making sure all of those people are as physically prepared, mentally prepared, and just well drilled for when that big moment comes. So yes, they are impressive. They're a huge feat of human performance, is how I like to describe it. And it doesn't happen by accident. It looks seamless, and it looks like it's robotic and easily repeatable, but that only comes with a huge amount of hard work from a lot of people.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question that a corporate client asked me very recently. They were from a company that does massive engineering projects. And one of the issues they find is that at the beginning of the project, everyone's really kind of clued up and excited to get started. But by like 3/4 of the way through the project, kind of things begin to become a little bit maybe less urgent, and they've noticed a little bit of a drop off sometimes. So in a Formula One team, I mean, presumably when you turn up at Melbourne, first race of the season, everyone's keyed up, can't wait to get stuck in. You do those first few pit stops, they go really well. And now in a season, and you've just touched on this, now in a season with 24 races, you get 20 races down the line. How do you have the same skip in your step, as it were, when you enter the pit lane to make sure that you're giving it just as much as you were at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I get asked this quite a lot as well, and it actually does vary. What's required varies quite a lot from the front of the grid to the back of the grid. Because if you think about McLaren today, well, it's pretty easy to be motivated. There's a world championship just a couple of races further down the line, the biggest prize in this sport. So that's motivation. That's something that keeps driving you forward. But if you're a midfield team that's no longer in any hunt for a championship, might be in no man's land, so your position is perhaps already sort of nailed on, it can be difficult to get yourself to that same level. And your energy levels have naturally dropped because it's a long, hard, grueling season. So the solution to this, and we've done a lot of studies on this, inside the team, and I've done a lot since, particularly for the book, because we cover this quite a lot in the new book. But it actually depends a lot on this idea of, we focus on the idea of celebration. If you're a winning team at the front of the grid, you get these moments of celebration when you have a great race and you win something, you spraying the champagne. Those moments of celebration really cement in your mind this idea of sort of self-belief, of confidence, that you know you're a winner, continually repeating this message in your mind that you're a winner, because the surroundings and the environment you're in is reinforcing that. You're celebrating. But if you're not celebrating, if you're going through a tough period of time when you're not necessarily winning, that can be really hard to use the power of celebration to keep motivating. So what we do inside a big Formula One team, and a lot of big successful businesses do this too, is celebrate smaller things. So that we keep the power of celebration going, we're celebrating smaller wins. And it might be, for a back marker team, it might be literally getting to the end of a race unscathed. It might be moving forward from your starting position. It might be ticking off achieving a target that you set out to try and achieve. And although they're much smaller milestones, if you celebrate them continuously and repeatedly, it keeps that celebratory mindset going in the team's mind, and that keeps the self-confidence building throughout, and the self-belief building throughout this long season. So that's one of the real key things that teams use now. The very best teams, at least, use this to keep the psychology side of this moving forward in a positive way, even when actually you might be in a bit of no man's land towards the end of a season. The other side of it is, of course, the idea that you're working as part of a big team. And if one or two people start to drop their energy levels, lose a little bit of motivation, it's not just you that starts to suffer there. It's the entire group. And you've been through such a journey together that hopefully the culture within the best organizations keep that group mentality driving each other forward. So within the team, motivation, often when somebody slips a little bit in their motivation, the rest of the team will help to lift them up and keep them going. So that comes from having a great culture in an organization. That's not a quick thing to build, as you know. It comes from a long period of sustained driving in the right direction, often led from the very top. But if you can get that right, the culture will almost police itself and keep the motivation going all the way through. But it can be tough in certain circumstances up and down this grid over a very long season today.
Yeah, and this is all kind of a beautiful way to segue into talking about your book, Pit Lane Lessons. By the way, I love the fact you have that subheading, What F1 Can Teach You About Life and Work. So just give our listeners a little bit of, I suppose, a helicopter view of, this is not a book about Formula One. This is a book about what you've learned from spending years at the pinnacle, not just of motorsport, but also the pinnacle of Formula One, winning the World Championship. And then how you can apply this to life and work. So just give us a helicopter view of this book.
Yeah, well, as I said at the top, I think it's a real privilege to be part of a Formula One team. And you and I have both been lucky enough to do that. And what happens when you are part of particularly a top Formula One team, you're surrounded by the very best people in every single role, 1,000 people maybe in those teams. They're elite level, everybody. And when you do that every day for a decade, as I did, that changes you. It changes what you believe is possible, because you're going into work every day surrounded by these amazing people that are achieving incredible things. So you do that for a decade, you come out the other side with a totally different worldview. And I came out of this sport, and you said earlier on, it's sometimes difficult to step out of that into, in inverted commas, the real world. When you do that, you suddenly realize you think differently to everybody else. That's what happened to me. I realized I had a different worldview. I was thinking about everything slightly differently. And that led me into the world of working with big corporates and big companies to help them to think a little bit more like the way I did, because I knew it could help them achieve more. Well, this book, having done that for years, this book is now sharing those insights for everybody. And the way I try and describe this book in one sentence is it's to help anybody to think more about the challenges they face in life or work in the way that a top Formula One team would think about those same challenges. So when you come out the other side of this book, hopefully your mindset has shifted a little bit more towards the mindset of a top F1 team. And you can apply that to everything. So if you're, suffering with some sort of mental challenges, whether you've got challenges at work, whether you're trying to build a career, build a relationship, any of those things, financial challenges, Formula One teams face all of those same things. And if you can put yourself into the mindset of an F1 team with those challenges in front of you, you tend to think about it in a slightly different way than most people do. And I believe there's a huge amount of value in that. So that's really where the book came from and what it's about.
Now, there's a very nice foreword by none other than Jake Humphrey, who many listeners will know. Used to be the voice of Formula One on the BBC, and now, of course, hosts and indeed owns the High Performance podcast, one of the most listened to podcasts, with some great figures from across sport and business on there. So great to have Jake having written the foreword for your book, Mark. But let's jump into the chapters. There are 11 chapters in this book, and I'm unashamedly going to kind of go through those with you. I realize we're trying to condense many pages into a few sentences of your sort of commentary on this, but I actually loved reading the first chapter. Goals are more important than plans. Talk to us about that. What is it that makes goals so important when you want to achieve something really big, such as winning the Formula One World Championship?
Yeah, well, there's so many levels to this, and I think it's a little bit like we just talked about, having something that's a continuous motivation, and a goal is a really powerful way to do that. And when we talk about goals, it's easy in Formula One terms to think about the big one of winning the world title. That's an obvious goal, and I was fortunate to be at a top Formula One team where that was our target every single year. But within that, you have a myriad of other goals on a much shorter term and medium term basis. So we talk in the book about how powerful it is to have things to aim for, and also choosing the right things to aim for, because you can have a job list on a piece of paper in front of you throughout the day, and you can go through and start to tick those off as you go. It can be really motivating just to put that little tick next to something that you've accomplished. And one of the techniques that I talk about in the book that I personally have done for years is I always give myself 3 easy goals that I write in my journal every morning or the night before. And the first one of those is always to make my bed. And it seems like a crazy thing to put in the, number 1 on your job list every day. But the point of doing it is, first of all, it's really easy to do. It takes seconds. And also you can get it accomplished within the first 10 seconds of waking up. And what I do is I make sure I do that, and I do it without fail every single day, whether in a hotel room or at home. And then I physically go and I tick it off. And that little tick that you put next to your 3 job list in my diary there is a little motivating force to go on and try and achieve the next one, because 1 out of 3 is done. And then when you've got the second one done, which might be a little bit more difficult, you're almost there. You've only got 1 more to go. And that's another little motivating driving force to get the final one done. And if you make them with slightly increasing difficulty as the day goes on, but not so difficult that they're unachievable, by the end of the day, you've got 3 ticks next to that job list. And there's a real great sense of accomplishment that comes with that. It might be small when we compare it to trying to win a world championship in Formula One, but in our daily lives, it can be, as I said before, this continuous little moment of psychological celebration. When you place that tick, there's a little sense of self-belief or self-confidence that's built within your brain. The little sort of neurons that start firing are celebratory, and the tiny effect that has accumulates over time, and that self-belief and self-confidence builds. You feel like you're a winner because every day you've got 3 big ticks next to your job list. You've accomplished what you set out to achieve, and gradually over time you start to get bigger and bigger with what you're aiming at. And I think Formula One teams do this. They do this through job lists that the guys on the cars are working towards. The debriefs that we have every day are there designed to try and come up with a new goals list for the next session or for the next day. And as I said, it gradually builds into something that gets bigger and bigger, more and more significant. And hopefully the end result of that is a world title at the end of the year, which, my old team McLaren seem very, very close to now.
A kind of segue from that question is something that I've noticed is that the great champions never seem to be satisfied. I want to give you a kind of a personal example of someone that you worked for, Ron Dennis. In 1989, beginning of the season, I had the opportunity to interview Ron, and I started the interview by congratulating him on the 1988 season when McLaren had won 15 of the 16 Grand Prix. I said, what a great year, fantastic. And he said, no, I'm dissatisfied. We should have won all of them. And I never forget that response. And it says a lot about the mindset of people like Ron, isn't it? That perfection is what they want. But of course, for us mere mortals who work for them, it can be quite tiring having constantly big ambitions, never satisfied. I'm sure you see this as well in companies that you speak for, they've had a year with a certain set of results, and the bosses walk in and say, right, we want everyone to be 10% better next year. We want profitability. We want to hit the $1 billion target. It is relentless. What's your view on that sort of approach, and maybe the upsides and the downsides of that kind of relentless trajectory that some people are looking for?
Well, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. There are upsides and downsides to that. And, Ron's the great example, the greatest example, that certainly in my experience. I've never met anyone who is as relentless as he is through his sort of pursuit of perfection. But the reality is that not everybody in that company, I worked for Ron for 10 years, not everyone in that company was Ron Dennis. And so, we can't all be expected to think and operate like Ron. What we did was we tried to get as close to that as we could. And so, my attention to detail levels went through the roof over those 10 years. I came out the other side of McLaren so much more detail focused than the way I went in. But I also never got to the level that Ron was at. And actually, I reflected again on this in the book, in that I'm quite happy about that. I didn't want to turn into Ron. Ron was so obsessed that it was, for him it was healthy, but for me that would have been unhealthy. And we all have different parameters here. That's the point. Yeah. So Ron has the gravel on his driveway washed every periodically, collected up, cleaned, and put back down again. Now, to me, that's nuts. But to him, that's perfectly normal. And that's the way he lives his life. So for him, it's healthy. For me, that would have been unhealthy to get to that level, because to me, that's taking away from something else that I might be enjoying in life. I can be really detail obsessed about the things that matter to me, and yet not care that the gravel on my driveway is not perfectly clean. And so I think that's the point here. It's always about finding a balance. And the way that we describe this in the book is really about how we get to a point of trying to understand which details do matter to you. And there might be different details that matter to somebody else, but that's okay. So it's about understanding what's important to you, which details do matter. And if you've come to that conclusion that these particular details matter, absolutely go all in. If it's something you believe in and you want to achieve something, and those details are the things that are likely to get you there, if you're really into it, you go all in. And that's what, Ron taught me. Not about cleaning my driveway, but going all in on the things that matter. To him, everything mattered. To me, many things do matter in that sense. And, at other times, I'd much rather be sat on the sofa at home with my family around me, because that was important to me. Whereas, for some people, it'll be something slightly different. So understanding which details matter to you is a really key point of how far you're going to ever be willing to go with this. And no company director, no CEO should, in my opinion, ever expect everybody just to be like them all the time, because it's not. In a Formula One team, it's 1,000 different people with different characters, different makeups, different priorities. Yes, you want them all driving in the right direction to win a Formula One World Championship, but you can't expect them all to live their lives in the way that someone like Ron might.
Let's move on to another topic, which is innovation. So why do you talk about innovation as being more of a mindset rather than the thing you do?
Well, it's because, think about Formula One, it's one of the most innovative industries that I think, I can imagine. And having been involved in it, that was one of the things that really grabbed my attention about it. It's what I loved most. We were continuously innovating. And in Formula One, an innovative way of thinking has to be the norm. For a lot of the companies that you and I go and work with, they're all striving to become more innovative. They want to achieve, this culture of innovation, because it's going to set them aside from maybe their competition. But in the competition of Formula One, innovation is the basic requirement. It's normal. So, I came out of this industry thinking innovatively as a baseline way of thinking. And the reason I say it's a way of thinking and a mindset is because innovation often goes directly against the way that a lot of businesses and companies think they should operate. Being innovative is not always efficient. You can often spend an awful lot of money for a really small gain. Being efficient, it's effectively a case of trial and error is what innovation is. No one's ever done the thing you're trying to do before. That's the nature of innovation. And so to get there, if you think the rewards on the other side of trying to get this innovation to work are so great, are great enough, you're willing to go through a huge amount of pain, often financial pain, the pain of losing a lot of time and energy on a topic or an innovation that may well continually keep failing, but not giving up is what will eventually get you there. So that's what innovation is. You've got to think and be comfortable with the fact that you're going to have to maybe take a number of steps backwards before you ever get to a point of taking the actual step you want to take forwards. And most companies, which are run by, the bean counters, the financial departments, that makes no sense to them, because you're often going to be spending more money than you're ever going to be regaining back from the innovation working in the short term. Hopefully long term it works out for you, but most financial departments of companies are unable very easily to see very long term into the future, because they're looking at a bottom line on a balance sheet, whereas the innovators of this world are not necessarily looking so much at that, or even at a timeline, just at the eventual win that will come from this wonderful innovation they're all working on. Formula One teams have that in abundance, and I think it's a wonderful way of operating if you truly believe, and particularly in a world of real competition, which Formula One is. Because if you're not innovating in Formula One, everyone else around you is, and you'll go backwards very, very quickly, which is why I say it's almost a necessity and a mindset rather than a choice that we get to make in this sport.
Yeah, just great to hear these comments from you around this topic, because it's something quite close to my heart, which is why big businesses struggle to do the things that we almost take for granted in Formula One, which is also one of the reasons why some of the big car manufacturers who come into Formula One don't succeed, because they don't essentially have that way of operating.
Yeah.
Let's move on, because so when I got the PDF, and thank you very much for giving the advanced copy of your book, when I got the PDF of your book and I started going through it, I was on the one hand surprised, but then delighted to see that as early as chapter 3, you start talking about the impact of this high performance sort of environment. I mean, the chapter is headlined, you already have all the tools you need to conquer stress. So a couple of things arise out of that, Mark. One is, why did you decide so early in the book to dive into that topic? And just talk to us about that, because you can't have one without the other. You can't have this amazing performance and consistent focus on what you're trying to achieve as an individual, as a member of the team, without having, pressure as part of that. And of course, within Formula One, it's there all the time. So just talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, Formula One is perhaps the extreme version of this, isn't it? When we're operating at such high levels, in such intense competition, with so much at stake, the pressure and then therefore the stress that often results from that can be really quite extreme. But the truth is, every single person listening to this right now will at some point be facing pressurized situations. They'll feel stress, whether that's a job interview they're going for, whether it's a first date, a big bill they open up one morning that they can't, don't feel they can pay. The stress that can come from that can be overwhelming. And what we know, because we study this a lot, and stress, the negative impacts of stress will have a knock-on impact in a Formula One team negatively to our overall performance. So we have to try and find ways, as we always do in this sport, to mitigate against that, to turn it into some kind of positive driving force. And the book talks about that, because if everybody's going to face stressful situations like we do in a Formula One team, you can imagine getting ready for a real high pressure pit stop, as I said earlier on, coming towards the end of a big race where the championship's on the line. The feeling of pressure that you're under can be overwhelming. And as I said earlier, the actual physicality of doing a pit stop is muscle memory. It's easy. We know so well what to do. We've done it thousands of times. The pressure can be the thing that buckles you and can introduce some kind of mistake, and the consequences can be large. So we've worked with a lot of team and sports psychologists inside McLaren, and I've done that a lot since leaving the team as well, particularly in researching for the book. Understanding ways to manage that stress, I think, is one of the best tools that we can equip ourselves with, because it can apply to almost everything we face. If we can not be buckled by pressure and by the stressful feelings, that the sort of human response that comes with that, we can actually turn it into a positive. One of the examples I gave, although on a much lower level than a sort of pit stop, was writing the book. I got through writing this book partly because in the beginning, the publisher never gave me a deadline. It was an open-ended, right, I wrote the first book and it had gone really well. We'd like to get a second book from you. And it was completely open-ended. And it took me 3 years to write this book, partly because of that. I was just putting it off. I was procrastinating. I found it really difficult until the point where I was writing that chapter about pressure and stress. And I realized I didn't have the positive influence of having a pressurized deadline. And so I wrote to the publisher and said, look, you've got to give me a deadline. And then I was really surprised when they gave me a deadline of about 3 months away. And I was like, oh my God, really? But the pressure that came from that was a motivating driving force. And I was able to turn that pressure into something positive that got me writing, that got me moving, that meant I had to step everything up and deliver, excellence in the short time frame that I had, which was something I'm very used to doing because I've been trained in it. And I understand that not everybody is able to do that in the same way. So the chapter talks about many of the techniques, from everything from breathing techniques to sort of visualization, the things that I used to go through ahead of a big pit stop that we were taught by sports psychologists, professionals in this sport, that helped me no end to get into what we used to call a flow state when you're in a pit stop. It was almost muscle memory, but it was almost this automated process. And I did hundreds of pit stops over that final year when we won the championship with Lewis. I can't remember any of them. And it's only because I was in this flow state, having prepared myself mentally using some of the techniques that are now in this book to manage this sort of pressure that I was feeling and the body stress response that comes with that, which could have easily been overwhelming and been a negative impact on those pit stops. But in the end, I turned it into something that was actually much more positive, got into this flow state, and those pit stops went incredibly well, even under the most extreme pressure. So the reason I put this in the book is because I know this can help everybody. Everybody faces these kind of things in life at some period or another. And if it's not managed, it can very quickly go into a dark place and become a real negative force.
Okay, so you have said in the book, talent can win races, but teamwork wins titles. Love that, by the way. Talk to us about that, because you all think about, they're world champions, or that driver's a world champion because he's got supreme talent. Talk to me about teamwork.
Well, no Formula One driver has ever won a world championship without a great team behind them. This is the biggest team sport in the world. As I said earlier, I was very privileged to be part of one of those teams that had a lot of success, that was running at the front. And I have this understanding now of what level of importance the team behind the driver and behind any success, what impact that team can have, both good and bad. And, I talk in this chapter about some of the great experiences where teamwork has done us some massive favors and got us across the line first, but equally how terrible teamwork has cost us a championship. And the one real example that stands out to me is 2007 at McLaren was a year many people remember as being a disastrous one. And it was on so many levels. We had Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso, possibly the two greatest drivers in the sport at the time. We had a wonderful car, perfectly capable of winning a championship, and some great people in our team. But the teamwork was disastrous. We had all sorts of problems. The two drivers fell out with each other very publicly. The team ended up at war inside the four walls of our own garage. And we destroyed our own championship chances. And we came away from that season where we should have won everything with nothing. And that was a brutal way of being taught why teamwork really matters. And when I say teamwork, I mean everything from obviously the team working well together, but that includes the way we communicate with each other, the way we operate in and out of the garage, the way we live together on the road, how we get on with each other, the bonds we form, the willingness to work for each other. All of those things encompass teamwork. And so that disaster of 2007, we go through the winter between 2007, 2008, and we really started to understand that. And we went into forensic detail of trying to pick apart what went wrong. And some of the learnings that came from that, we put into place, of course, a year later in 2008 and won the championship at the same racetrack 12 months later. Now, I firmly believe we would not have won in 2008 with Lewis had we not gone through the disaster of 2007 and understanding why our teamwork really was one of the major deciding factors in that championship. And if we hadn't gone through that disaster, we wouldn't have been able to put those things right and learn from them to execute a great championship in 2008. So, as I said, I have that lesson drummed into you, first of all, in the most brutal way, in a negative sense. Sometimes we learn more from the epic failures that we face, don't we, than we do the big successes. But that particular big success would not have happened, certainly not in the same way, if we hadn't been through the disastrous teamwork failure of 2007. So there's an awful lot in that chapter about how teamwork works, why it has to work, and how you don't have to be part of a big Formula One team for that to happen. A team is anything, any collaboration of people, a couple, a marriage, a relationship, a family, your sports team, your people in your office. They're all teams, and they can all benefit from great teamwork.
Now, how does it feel for you as a commentator now when you see Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, two McLaren teammates, going for the title in your former team? I was thinking about this only yesterday because I knew we would be talking today. I mean, you must look at the potential for conflict at McLaren this year and reflect on what you learned all those years ago with the Alonso-Hamilton conflict.
Yeah. There are so many similarities. It's extraordinary, really, and particularly, or at Max has sort of dropped away a little bit in this championship over the course of this Brazilian Grand Prix weekend. But actually, in this run-up where he was chasing the two McLaren guys down, so many similarities to 2007. In that year, we had, Lewis and Fernando, who, you come all the way through. They led the championship all the way. You get to the final race, and it was an unheard of that it would not be one of our two drivers winning the title that day. Both of them were in the front. Both of them are quick. And yet we walked away with nothing because in that year it was Kimi Räikkönen who snuck through, sort of almost unnoticed in a Ferrari and stole the championship by a point. Thoroughly deservedly, of course, because as I said, we destroyed our own championship chances with that terrible teamwork. But the point is, it was two drivers in the same team going for the world title, which is actually a fairly rare set of circumstances. It doesn't happen that often. You normally get one driver from one team, and if there is another fight, it's from someone else. The last time this happened really was probably Lewis and Nico at Mercedes. That ended in tears. You can then go back to Lewis and Fernando with us. That ended in tears. You can think about Prost and Senna at McLaren all those years ago. Ended in tears. There's very few circumstances that I can think of in the history of this sport where the two drivers in the same team have been fighting for the world title without too much outside threat. And it's almost, if you think about it, if you step back and think about it, it's kind of reasonable, isn't it? When you think about those two drivers, Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, the one thing that they have dreamt of since they were a kid is becoming Formula One world champion. And now the one thing standing in the way of each other is the guy on the other side of their own garage. What used to be your teammate now becomes your worst enemy. And so it's not that surprising that, of course, they go from working together to working against each other. And that's a real challenging dynamic for a Formula One team. I think McLaren have done their very best to manage that. And at the moment, the drivers feel like they're kind of okay. They're not at war with each other. We'll find out over the next few races if Oscar can get that gap right back down and it becomes close. Well, tensions will undoubtedly start to rise. If Lando continues to pull away, then maybe Oscar falls away and the threat is no longer there, and perhaps those tensions don't materialize in the same way. But it's a real challenging dynamic, a unique one in Formula One, in that sometimes the teammates within their own team have to, for the nature of that drivers' championship, become challenges and therefore enemies.
Now, looking at the remaining chapters of the book, one really jumped out at me and I sort of dived straight towards it, which is we're all leaders. We just don't know it yet. What do you mean by that? Because I think leadership, people think often of leadership as a job title. You have to be the chief executive or the managing director.
Yeah.
Talk to us about leadership and what you've learned about that in terms of our own individual capabilities.
Yeah, well, you just touched on it there, really. I've studied a lot of my own experiences within Formula One, but I've also studied a number of use cases or a number of case studies, if you like, over recent times. I looked at McLaren in the modern day. I looked at Mercedes and I looked at Ferrari and a little bit at Red Bull as well, of how they've all been managed and led in different ways from the very top. They've got different structures. They've got different ways of operating. Some good, some bad, and some have led to sustained success and some have led to sustained disappointment. You can work out which ones I'm talking about. But if you think about McLaren today, one of the things that they have deliberately focused upon is building a team full of leaders. And as you said, irrelevant of what it says on your job title or your business card, the team is full of leaders. And that's been a deliberate, conscious effort to grow an organization that produces leaders everywhere. And that's about giving people the ability and the freedom to speak up when needed, to put ideas forward, no matter where you are in the organization. If you've got an idea to make something better, to improve something, or something that you think could just work, you could try. And it goes back a little bit towards that innovation mindset. If you're willing to try it, even if it's one of the cleaners or someone who works in a restaurant that's come up with the idea, why not? Because everybody's got something to offer. And if you're given the freedom and the environment in which you're free to stand up, put your arm in the air and say, listen, I've got this idea, can we try it? Or I don't think this is going to work and this is why, it produces leaders. And I think having a team full of leaders means you increase the ability to deliver excellence, because you're not just relying on one leader and 1,000 followers. And that's often the way that big organizations still in the modern day work. You go back 20 years in Formula One, it's almost how all Formula One teams operated. It was the Ron Dennises, the Frank Williams, the Eddie Jordans of this world. It was one person generally at the top, almost a dictatorship. Well, most Formula One teams today are run by boards of directors. It's a very different structure, much more of a horizontal organization structure, if you like. But particularly McLaren, which is the one that I studied a little bit for this chapter, it's about creating leaders in every single position where people have the ability to take a little bit of control over their own workflow and the way they go through their days, as opposed to just being given a set of instructions and following those. Because the upshot of that is it can work, but sustaining that over a long period of time, particularly today, people feel a little bit restricted. They want autonomy over their lives to some extent in all parts of their life. And as a company and as a business, even a Formula One team, if you can tap into that and give people some of that autonomy that they're craving, you tend to get more out of them. You get a better product out of those people because they feel like they've got an element of control over their lives. And it's all about the mindset. It's all about the psychology of how people feel at work today. We didn't care about that in quite the same way 20 years ago. It was just about, here's what I want you to do, deliver it perfectly, and we'll all be happy. Well, the boss is happy in that scenario, but the people that are having to just follow those instructions, maybe not so much. And because the mindset of the population have shifted over recent decades into one where people feel like they want a little bit more control, if you can tap into that now as a CEO or as a leader of an organization, the chances are you're going to be much more productive and better off with what you get out of your people because they feel happier, more fulfilled, and a little bit more content.
Yeah. I love all of that because, and again, your former team, McLaren, great example of a turnaround in terms of culture, leadership. I think the job that Zach Brown and more recently Andrea Stella have done to turn that team into world champions, it's a formidable case study in leadership and culture, and exactly this point around every single person being empowered. Mark, your book is a great achievement, and congratulations on that. I know how hard it is to write a book. I love the fact that you asked your publisher for a non-negotiable deadline, something that we actually quite like in Formula One. We like working towards all of those. Tell our listeners, where can they get hold of Pit Lane Lessons? How do we go about acquiring a copy?
Well, it is now, as of last week, in all good bookshops anywhere, but there is a link in the bio of all of my social platforms. So on my Instagram channels, on LinkedIn, you can find the link in there for an Amazon link. So yeah, it's available pretty much everywhere now. So yeah, please do go and get yourself a copy.
And what's your Instagram?
Well, I've actually got two. So I've got at F1 Elvis, which is all the specific Formula One racing stuff that I do and the Wheeler Dealers content. And then I have Marc_Priestley, which is a little bit more tailored towards this kind of stuff, the personal development stuff, the topics we've talked about today. I try and focus on that particular channel.
Well, that's great. And I know your content is just formidable. I'm a keen follower. And as I say, congratulations on the book. Thanks so much for giving us your time. I know you're really busy. And I wish you luck over the rest of the 2025 season. Very exciting climax to Formula One coming up. And good luck with your book. Hope it's a championship winner in its own right.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Always love having these conversations. So thanks for having me on, and same to you.
Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to the Business of Winning podcast. And if you want to learn more about Performance Insights, simply visit our website at performanceinsights.co.uk, providing expert speakers and hosts from the world of Formula One motor racing to corporate events and conferences worldwide.